What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the NH Experience, and I have a very special guest on this edition of the show. He can be seen all over the NFL Network. You can find his great works of creative writing and inside information all over the NFL.com site. He's worked for such outlets as ESPN, the San Diego Union Tribune. He's also reported extensively on player activism and social justice as he continues to do. He does a great job as an NFL insider. So all the information, all the news that comes out, this man definitely has what you need to know. He's also co-authored a book at one time with Cardinals wide receiver Larry Fitzgerald. And you can catch him weekly alongside Steve Weish on the Huddle and Flow podcast. Love the podcast. It's great if you haven't checked it out. It's available on all streaming platforms. He's also from the West Coast, so we're definitely going to give him love for that. And he's an HBCU graduate of the Howard University. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome the one and only Jim Trotter. What's going on, Jim? How you doing?
I'm blessed, man. I appreciate you having me, Nick.
Oh, thanks for coming on. I know you're a very busy man, especially with the playoffs that are upon us right now. So I want to get into a little bit before we all know the great work that you've done and continue to do. But I want to take a step back a little bit. And at what point did you discover that you wanted to be on this journey of media and being in the circle of reporting? And then at what point did you realize, okay, the NFL is the lane that I want to definitely cover and be a part of and really get into the trenches of developing myself as a reporter, or yourself rather as a reporter?
I honestly, I kind of knew in high school that this was an avenue I wanted to pursue. The only issue was at that time, obviously, I was playing on teams, ball, baseball, those sorts of things, and you can't write on your team. And so I never journaled in high school. But the minute I graduated, I decided when I got to college, now I can go pursue it. And so from day one, that was kind of the track that I was on. What's interesting, initially, I had no interest in covering the NFL. I was at the San Diego Union Tribune. I had worked my way up from high writer to being our NBA writer. And obviously, in San Diego, we didn't have, or we don't have an NBA team. But what we do, or what we did at that time, is we would cover the LA teams, the Clippers and the Lakers, and then we would cover the playoffs and whatnot. So I really started to enjoy that after a couple of years. And so one year they said, "Hey, we want you to back up the Chargers for a year." And I was like, cool, because, it really didn't interfere with my NBA work. And then the next year they were like, "We want you to be the beat writer." And I was like, I'm not so sure I'll do this. And the truth is, it was Nick Canepa, a columnist with the San Diego Union Tribune, who said to me, "You really ought to give this a second thought. The Chargers are the number one beat, not only in the sports department, but you could make the case at the paper. Or there's a lot of ability on it. There's a lot of responsibility with it, all those sorts of things." And so I decided, okay, I'll do it. And ultimately, it's the best decision I ever made from the standpoint that the NFL life fits so perfectly with a family life. Meaning, for instance, with baseball, you're not on the road, weeks at a time. With the NBA, it would be sort of the same thing if you were doing that and actually traveling. With football, I could be home pretty much Monday through Friday and only have to travel on the weekend. So from a family standpoint, and then from a work standpoint, it turned out to be the perfect decision.
It's interesting that you said that because everybody thinks, and I'm glad you brought some clarity to that because you actually were an NBA writer, which is interesting because everybody knows you for the NFL. So the
Right.
fact that you made this move and you made that decision that pretty much changed the course of your life, I find that very interesting, and I'm glad you were able to expose that because I think a lot of young people who are trying to figure out what lane they want to travel in as far as the media circuit goes. One decision can change your life. And for
I,
people that are watching,
I love the NBA, so I was enjoying it. But to be clear, I don't want to put myself in that lane with those guys who actually covered on a daily basis. I was like in and out. When the Lakers would have a home game or the Clippers, or if I was doing a feature, I would go up, but I wasn't doing it every day, and I wasn't traveling every day. So it was like I was an NBA writer, but I wasn't an NBA writer, if that makes sense.
gotcha.
But what I loved about the NBA was that every day there was a different story. if you're covering games, every game is unique to itself. And you could have a different protagonist, you could have a different topic that you want to focus on, whatever it may be. Whereas with football, at times, I found it kind of mundane because, especially if you have a bad team, you get to the middle of the season, like I remember one year, Chargers started out 0-11. And by the time it got to 11, it was I don't want to say fun, but it was interesting because then the question was, are they going to go 0-16? And but if 3-8, and by Wednesday of that week, maybe Thursday, you kind of said all you want to see, and yet you still got a few more days to go there to fill in copy. So that's what I loved about the NBA is sort of the immediacy of it, the opportunity to have different storylines every night. With the NFL, it's like, man, can we just get to the game?
Mm-hmm. Howard University. What was it about Howard University that you decided to go there, and then how did that shape you as well, not just as a journalist, but as a man growing into where you are now?
Oh man, we could be here all day talking about that. The reality is, man, my parents graduated high school, so college wasn't talked about a lot in my house, and it was actually one of my high school counselors who really was sort of determined that I was going to go to college. And so at my high school, we had a Black student union. And I was at the time living in Stockton, California, up in Northern California, San Joaquin Valley. And they were having a state BSU, Black Student Union convention, and it was held on the UCLA campus. And the forums was on historically Black colleges and universities. I knew nothing about, again, because my parents hadn't gone to college. Like I say, they hadn't even graduated high school at that time. So I sat in on the forum and I was like, man, this just sounds. And one of the schools that was up, on the dais was a representative from Howard. So I was like, and again, this is the spring of, when I'm getting ready to graduate in less than a month or two. I'm like, I want to go there. So I applied and I got accepted, but I didn't have the money to go. So I said, okay. So I ended up going to what was then Cal State Hayward, which is now Cal State East Bay, and said, I'm just going to get my general ed courses out of the way, try and save some money, and then transfer. And so that's what I did. I spent 2 years at Cal State Hayward. I transferred back to Howard. Many of my credits transferred. And I was fortunate enough after a year to get an academic scholarship. So my tuition was paid every year. So that helped me get through school. But in terms of how Howard impacted me, I can't even begin to tell you. I can tell you this, that here we are, I graduated in 1986. So we're almost, 40 years later, whatever. I can't do math. I'm terrible at math. But anyway, almost 4 decades later. And if I had to do it over again, I would do it again. The thing when I got on that campus, I had gone to predominantly white high schools. I've gone to Cal State East Bay. And to get on a campus where everybody looked like me and where there was a nurturing environment where I didn't feel like I was just a number, where I felt like professors were actually invested in me, into whether I succeed or not, all those sorts of things. And then the students you're around, there is this commonality of experience to some degree, but also this desire to achieve, and it's just, there are no words. Howard University prepared me to be a journalist, to be a man, to be a contributor to society, all of those things. So if I had to do it all over again, I say right now, the fact that I would say I would do it in a heartbeat without hesitation, I think speaks to my time there.
A lot of people that I've spoken with that have gone to Howard have always shared similar experiences that you have, as far as how they've developed the investment from not only the faculty, but just being in the quad, being in the student union, and how it's been able to teach them so many valuable lessons that they still use today. You were obviously going to the San Diego Union Tribune. You later on went to ESPN. So how was your time at ESPN, and what was that experience like for you?
What's funny is when I was at Howard, I was a journalism major. And my senior year, I decided that I didn't want to go into TV. I wanted to be judged on the quality of my work and not on how I looked or how I sounded, those sorts of things. Because I'm conservative by nature. There are risks I like to take and then risks I don't like to take. And so I decided I was going to go print and ended up working for the student newspaper that senior year. The thing when we had at Howard at that time, we had what we call a communications fair, and media companies from around the country would come in and they would interview, prospective graduates for jobs as well as internships. So when I went through that process, knowing I didn't have a lot of print experience, I had two offers. I had one from the Cleveland plane dealer, which was offering me a 6 internship, which they tell you can become a full-time job. And the other one I was offered was from the Muskegon Chronicle in Muskegon, Michigan, a small 50,000 circulation paper. And they were offering me a full-time position. Well, I took the Muskegon Chronicle because, again, my nature, my conservative nature, I wanted to go someplace where I could learn and I had a chance to, if I'm going to make some mistakes, I'm not going to fail down, so to speak. And that's what I got there. I got a chance to do a lot of different things and to learn, start to my craft. So anyway, I'm telling you that as a patient. So I was there for like 10 months, and I went to the Morning News Tribune in Tacoma, Washington, again as a high school writer, did my thing there, and I get a call there was an editor from the San Diego Union who came up to interview for a job at our paper in Tacoma. And so what they did is they gave him like a week's worth of papers and said, we want you to critique these. And so he read them, and after some of my work was in there, and he went back to San Diego and said to the sports editor there, hey, there's a high school writer up here you might want to take a look at. So I get a call asking if I would be interested in interviewing. Well, I had never been to San Diego in my life. I had never been on a plane until I went back to Howard. Went to my sports editor at the time in Tacoma, and I said, hey, I'm getting a call from San Diego asking if I would be interested in interviewing. And he looked at me with this smile, and I'm like, what is that about? And he said, I'll never forget, he said, the closest thing to paradise on earth you're going to find is San Diego. And I was like, really? I'm like, okay. So I go down, I interview, and then I see what he's talking about in terms of the ocean and the climate and all of that. So cool, I'm there. Well, I was there 18 years working my way up, and actually thought I was going to retire there, and had kind of, I had my kids, everything else. So I'm like, I'm good. And then Sports Illustrated had nothing. And as you know, Sports Illustrated is like the beacon when it comes to magazine writing for sports writing, or really any writing. And I had never even once considered ever working there. And when this opportunity came up, it was like, well, you never know unless you take the chance. So I remember I reached out to them and ended up getting an interview. Long story short, get the job, and didn't feel like I measured up with the folks there. Because, these are people I had been reading for some time, and the best of the best. And there was that transition when I was there. It's not unlike a football coach, when you're a first-time head coach and you get into a place and all of a sudden maybe you start to doubt yourself a little bit when things don't go right off the bat. And that was a little bit of me at Sports Illustrated, where, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me. I'm working remotely. I didn't feel like I had sort of a mentor, an advocate, and that's not to say that anyone was against me or anything. Sometimes stuff you get in your own head. You think about stuff too much and you create scenarios that aren't there. But anyway, so I was there, 6.5 years. And then I ended up being laid off because they were going public, and they basically told me it's not performance. You just make too much money and we got to get lean to sell the magazine. So I'm like, wow, I've never been laid off in my life before, and I didn't quite know how to handle it. But here's a story for a young journalist in terms of the power of social media. So I remember it's like, okay, what do I do? And initially there's this embarrassment, even though it's not your fault and it wasn't due to performance. You're unemployed now. How do you handle it? You don't want people to know, but you do want people to know so that you can get, try and get the next job. So I reached out to a few people at different media outlets, said, hey, I just got let go. I'm looking for something. And the beauty of it for me was within 3 hours, I knew I was going to be fine because I had 4 places that said, bring you in, we want to interview you. And ESPN was one of those places. And the people there were great. I'm trying to think, I think I spent 3.5, 4.5 years there and work with some of the best people you could work with. But there was something more that I needed. I felt like I wasn't being used quite the way that I wanted or as often as I wanted. And I, at that point, had sort of found my purpose of wanting to write and talk about justice issues as it related to players and trying to humanize players and get people to see that there's more to these guys than just football. And I thought, what better way to do that than on a 24-hour NFL platform, which was the NFL Network. And a friend of mine had worked there, and he was interested in having me there. And long story short, that's how I wound up at NFL Network. And to NFL Network's credit, and particularly my immediate boss, John Marvel, he's let me talk about the things that I want about and write about the things that I want to write about, and I'm very appreciative of that.
Now, one thing I will say, I mean, when I watched you on ESPN, that's the first. I think I was probably the first time I saw you, and I'm like, whoa, okay, they got a new face. Anytime there's a new face, everybody's like, okay, who is he? Especially if you're unfamiliar with the previous work at the time, you're always like, okay, who is the? Oh man, let me check this guy. We see another brother on TV. Like, okay, let's see what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And you kind of get excited, you kind of get inspired rather. And you talk about humanizing the players, and I think that's almost sometimes could be a lost art because a lot of times we're so focused on stats and whose player is the flashiest and who's the most popular. But you really do an outstanding job humanizing the players. How much did you receive any type of I don't want to say pushback, but any type of resistance when you first started out to say, hey, I want to talk about social justice issues that pertain to my community, pertain to players that look like me? Was there any type of pushback, or did you get full support when you initiated that movement?
Oh, there's always a little, or at least initially there was some. Remember, that was after Colin took a knee. It wasn't too long after. It was a whole stick to sports crowd. And we saw how that was impacting media outlets, and ESPN was not immune from that. And there were mandates from up above that, let's try and focus on sport, limit our social media activity as it related to social activism and all those sorts of things. And, one thing I try and pride myself on is that, look, I'm going to say what I have to say, but hopefully I'm going to say it in a way that's professional and not gratuitous or out of line or those things. And I think for the most part, I do a pretty good job with that. I'm human, so I have my moments where my emotions get me a little bit. But, at ESPN, one of the things I found that, there was one in particular who, a couple of different times said to me, I think you crossed the line, and I disagreed with him and said, I don't think I crossed the line. And, and that was at a time where they were suspending folks and whatnot. So I really thought there might be a point there I would suspend it. And if I had been, I would have been comfortable with it because I felt like I didn't do anything wrong. And I felt like I was saying what everyone else was thinking or willing to say for fear that there might be consequences behind it. And so, yeah, there was some of that. And even now, no matter where you are, people get a little uncomfortable when you start going down that road. But again, I try very hard not to just beat people over the head, but to try and shine a light on issues in a way that hopefully will make you think a little bit and just say, this isn't right, or we need to have a deeper discussion about this.
I know you talked about being at ESPN and your time there had ended, but I know you were also very high up when it came to the Pro Football Writers, of America, when you were doing a lot of great work with that. And then once you went to the NFL Network, you were told, hey, I can no longer be a part of the Pro Football Writers Association, which I thought was incredibly mind-boggling, because I thought you would want somebody who's actually inside the league that knows the ins and outs to give some insight on what to do moving forward. How did that affect you, and how were you able to move on from that? Because I mean, I can't imagine how that would affect me, especially with all the hard work that you put in.
No, I appreciate it. I'm not gonna lie to you. That one hurt a little bit because I was fighting for us, meaning journalists. I was fighting for access. I was fighting for diversity and inclusion. One of the things that I did as a Pro Football Writers of America president is that person gets to decide who the two pool reporters are going to be for the Super Bowl each year. And so traditionally, it has been two males who cover it, typically long-standing NFL writers, and which is fine. But I said when I came in, you know what? I want to give an opportunity to those who haven't had a chance. So I said I want two women to be the pool report first year, and we ended up going with Nikki, who's now at the Washington Post at the time. I think she was working for the Denver Post. No, I can't remember if it was the Denver Post or Rocky Mountain News, one of the two. But I just felt that it was important for young women to see that there are opportunities for them in this field of NFL writing, and because I believe representation matters. And so one of the things I was fighting for or pushing to do in my second year was to develop a relationship with women's sports organizations to bring in more women to the organization and whatnot. So when they told me that I couldn't be president anymore because I was now working, I was now an NFL employee, I was hurt. I was disappointed because I was fighting for the same thing that they're fighting for. And the irony of it is, I don't get any more favorable access because I'm at the network than I did when I was at ESPN. In fact, the access may have been better at ESPN. So it's kind of ironic that, I would be kicked out because of that. When again, all I was trying to do was continue to fight for everything that every other writer and media person was fighting for.
Absolutely. I think what gets lost sometimes, and I mean, I've only been doing this for about 11 years, and I've been in various locker rooms. I've been in various media press boxes, as you have, of course. But the one thing that I've seen that's pretty much decreased has been the availability of Black journalists, especially Black-owned media journalists, who have decided to go the independent route, not necessarily be connected to a major. How important in today's society with everything that's going on? We know this week with the whole influx of these, what I call domestic terrorists that entered our U.S. Capitol building. How important is Black media in today's society in your estimation?
Oh, I think to the period of all kinds is important. And when we're diversity, I mean diversity of thought too. Not all Black people think the same. Not all white people think the same. Not all Asian people think the same. So for me, diversity on all levels is important. But as we talk specifically to race, look, we have a locker room that's 70% Black in terms of the players. We have some shared experiences, which is not to say that we all grew up the same way, but being a Black man in America, there are some shared experiences there. Diversity of all types matter to me, not just race.
No, I think you brought an incredible point. I think diversity of thought, I think that needs to be explored more as well, because I agree. I think we all don't think the same, no matter what color or gender you happen to be. But I also noticed that there are a lot more opportunities for those that don't look like us, or get more chances for those that don't look like us. And we have to prove ourselves 2 to 3 times more.
But I'm going to say this to you, Nick, and I'm including myself in this here because I've written about it. One of the things we have to understand is, particularly when we're young, those get involved. And we want to be the person in front of the camera. We want to be the person with our picture in the newspaper on a call, all sorts of things. Because there's a lot of ego gratification and things that come with that. But the reality is the real power are the people you don't see. And that's the people who are sitting in the glass offices, decisions on who is going to cover what the angle of that is going to be, whether it gets published, where it gets published, all those sorts of things. And so for us to have, in my opinion, to have more of us represented, we need to understand that we need more of us behind the scenes as well. And that includes in television as producers, as management, those sorts of things. So it doesn't operate just in a vacuum, but I understand why maybe some young people might not think about going that road, because that visibility of being in front of the camera, and then you start thinking about the money you make and all those sorts of things. I can tell you there's money to be made behind the scenes too for the young people out there who are listening. So, and a lot more security at times too. So it's worth thinking about.
No, absolutely. Fair point. When you talk about also too, there's been a lot, obviously, with what's going on with social injustice, with racial inequality, especially in the NFL, where a lot of teams have made statements about trying to be more diverse, tackle certain issues. PSA, a lot of PSAs came out. Again, I'm not saying I agree with it, but I have to put that out there as far as a lot of PSAs coming out.
Look,
Do you honestly think anything will change as a result, or will there be just enough change to pacify the audience, and then once this thing blows over, or will they feel like it blows over, it'll go back to business as usual?
the players and the owners, the players in the NFL through Inspire Change, the partnership between the Players Coalition and the NFL, they're doing the work outside in terms of trying to better things in players' communities and whatnot. And a lot of that headlines, but the work is being done. It's been ongoing for over 4 years now. So are we seeing a change? I would say yes, but maybe not the type that's drawing the big headlines. When the players, with the backing of the league, can get voter reform where former felons are now able to vote, some for the first time, including Michael Vick, that's huge. That's something that helps change, that can lead to change, because I'm a firm believer that for change to really happen, it has to happen legislatively, because all that other stuff, if you don't have it in writing, as they say, it doesn't really matter. When we're talking about football itself, look, I've said this before and I will say it again. The diversity in the NFL is not about, as it relates to coaches and general managers, it is not a league problem, it's not a league office problem, it is an ownership problem, because owners are the ones who do the hiring, okay? So the league office has tried to do everything it can to level this playing field, including, in my opinion, going the absurd step of trying to incentivize the process of hiring a minority coach. And I always say, if you have to incentivize something for someone to do the right thing, you've already done the wrong thing. That's what I believe. It doesn't make me right. It's just what I believe. Where I think the NFL can do better is that when you look at the league office, top 12 executives coming into the season, there were only 2 people of color. When you look at each of the 32 clubs, look at their executive hierarchy. Many of them might have one, if none, people of color. When we had Arthur Blank on the podcast, Arthur Blank was talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and I had to remind him, when I went on your team website this morning, of your top 19 executives, there was only one person of color. That's not someone who, at least to that point, whose words match their actions. So that's one of the things I've tried to do in the role that I'm in now, is just say to people, look, words are no longer good enough. You're going to be judged on your actions. And I'm not afraid to have that discussion with you, about why your actions don't match your words. And it makes people uncomfortable. And sometimes it probably gets me into trouble. But as John Lewis would say, the late John Lewis would say, it's good trouble.
Yeah, see, that's one of the things I respect about you and Steve Weiss. You guys are unapologetically afraid to confront those who need to be confronted, not to be controversial, not to get eyeballs and clicks, but to really get down to the heart of the matter. And that's one of the things a few people I've spoken with, but myself included, really appreciate about the Huddle and Flow podcast, because you guys don't cut corners. You guys have fun. There's times you talk about really good stories and you bring a lot of things out, but you're not afraid to confront whether it's an owner whether it's a general manager, whether it's someone, a current player, former player, what have you. You always get to the root of the matter. And that is something that I always have a tremendous amount of respect. And I love to see that, because that needs to happen. I don't think it happens enough in our society, to try to bring a solution to a problem that we say that's a problem.
No, I appreciate that. That means a lot. The one I say to young folks is, look, Steve and I have been doing it a while, so we have a little bit of credibility on it, so to speak, built up when we talk to. The other thing I would say to young folks who are coming in the business and doing it, the one thing you don't want to do is simply attack people. You want to you present them with the facts, and the facts will say what needs to be said. I remember one time the Chargers looking for. I was a beat writer for the Chargers, and they were looking for a coach. And so the owner, they interviewed like 5 people for the job. The owner met with 4 of the candidates in person. The 5th candidate he did not meet with in person, and the 5th candidate happened to be the only person of color. So I remember I wrote it, and it wasn't a headline or anything. It was just in my notebook. And I'll never forget the team calling my boss and even going above the sports editor to the editor of the paper, because it was upset, essentially saying I was calling them racist. And my point was, I'm not calling them anything. I'm just presenting the facts. I don't need to say anything. And that's why my paper stood behind me on it. And there was no issue. I'm not calling you anything. You must, and there's a saying that a wounded dog yelps loudest. So clearly I must have touched a nerve. But the fact that you would treat the one person of color differently than you treated the 4 other candidates who were all non-Black, I don't have to say anything. You have to answer for that. So that's what I'm saying. Gone out and written and said, man, this racist team or whatever. Now
Right.
I've made myself the story. And that's the thing as a journalist you want to do. You just want to let the, speak for themselves, unless you're a columnist, and that's a totally different thing.
Absolutely. Hit dog on holler. So I want to ask you too, how did you and Steve Weiss join forces and create the Huddle and Flow podcast? How did that come about? How long have you two known each other? And how have you both developed that chemistry with each other?
Well, Steve and I have known of each other for, obviously we both went to Howard. I left before I got there. And I knew of him from afar because he was doing great things with the Miami Herald and the Washington Post and all of that. And then obviously he went to NFL Network, or he went to the AJC and then the NFL Network. So, I was a fan of his work. And so we knew of each other, but we really loved each other. Well, by the time I got to NFL Network, we said, hey, we should do a podcast together. 2 Black men from Howard University, etc. So we went to the powers that be with it. And they appeared to be interested, but it just died on a vine. It went nowhere. It was never done. So we figured, you know what? They're not going to let this happen, because obviously we were going to bring our own flavor to it. And then after, the George Floyd murder, when all of a sudden the entire country was woke and people were dealing with these issues, and the discussion of diversity and inclusion and all of that came up, they came to us and said, remember that podcast you guys were talking about? Are you interested? And so we kind of looked at each other and laughed a little bit. And we're like, look, yeah, we're interested. But if we do it, we're going to do it from our perspective, with our flavor, and we're going to be honest about whatever it is we're talking about. And that's kind of how it goes. So when it comes to the pod, and even with guests, we just say, hey, who would we want to talk to? Just have a conversation with. And that's kind of how it works. And if there's a specific topic we want to get on, then we'll try and find guests for that specific topic. But for the most part, it's just, who's interesting that we feel the listeners would be interested in hearing from.
And that's a beautiful thing when you have a network of that caliber to entrust you all, and to be able to back away, so to speak, and let you all just kind of drive the bus and be able to allow yourselves to really be personable, where people can feel like they can relate to you, and you bring on guests, like you said, that you want to talk to, that you feel like also the fans will want to hear from, and people
Yeah.
want to know about. You guys had some illustrious guests. You talked about Arthur Blank, the owner of the Falcons, earlier. I know that you guys had Sean Payton on at one point. He really dropped some gems, and then you had Michael Vick on as one of your other guests. But with all the guests that you've had, who has been the most interesting guest thus far that's appeared on the Huddle and Flow podcast?
Oh man, that's hard to say because we've had great guests. I mean, and I'm not saying that to pat us on the back. I'm just saying people have been gracious enough to come on and share their stories with us and whatnot. I mean, I go back to week one with Ron Rivera when it's week one of the NFL season and you got a coach who's battling cancer, and to come on and talk, candidly about what he's dealing with, how it's affected his family, losing a brother to cancer. How does he tell his mother about it? That he's been diagnosed, all these sorts of things. It started right there. And then, because it was funny, we were only going to do one show a week. And then we just were like, man, there's so many people we want to talk to that all of a sudden it just morphed into two a week. And then we were like, we wanted to do more. We can't do more. We got a job to do. We got a day job. So, but you go from there to Doug Williams and Jerry Rice and Larry Fitzgerald and, Soledad O'Brien and Lindsey Davis and Jamel Hill and Kerry Champion, Michael Holly and Michael Smith, John Lynch, John Schneider. I mean, God, I'm leaving people off, but it's just, they all have something unique to them. So they're all good. Maya Wiley, the who's running for mayor of New York, found her to be fascinating. Chuck D, spent 8 hours with Chuck D, and it wouldn't have been enough, So all of these folks we so appreciate, and we also try and shine a light on people that the community might not know very well yet because they're still maybe up and coming, or they're in an area you might not know. So you get a football player like Jesse Bates, who's one of the emerging safeties in the NFL, or you talk to James Lopez, who's the president of Will Packer Productions, and they're doing a biopic on Doug Williams. And he's a guy that was responsible, helped put together movies like Girls Trip or The Photograph or What Men Want, those sorts of things. So I'm saying that to you. The question you're asking me is like asking me, which of my children do I love most? I can't answer that, man. It's all
We talked about a lot of different things, but I wanted to get your perspective. We talked about what happened with the Capitol building this earlier in the week, and to me, it just seemed we heard a lot of NBA players speak about. We heard Draymond Green speak very candidly and openly. We heard Steve Kerr, Kawhi Leonard, Jaylen Brown from the Celtics. So many NBA players that really have come out and really spoken about that issue, and that issue that's been prevalent, and we know in our communities, but now the world gets to see it. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and how did that affect you directly? How did it affect your family? Because I know a lot of people talk about how their kids witnessed that and how their kids were starting to have some type of anxiety, warning, hey, is this going to come directly to our front door? So how did you deal with it, and how did you discuss that with your family?
Well, the good thing for me, my kids are grown, so I didn't have to worry about having, deal with anxiety of a young kid.
Mm-hmm.
But what it does is it reflected how there are two Americas. It was creation or affirmation or just illustrative of how there are two Americas, because we both know that if that is Black Lives Matter movement or that had been Black storming the Capitol, they would not have alive that those white folks did, and that's just the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I grapple with is I struggle with us now giving applause or praise or credit to people who are now distancing themselves from this president who for 4 years basically enabled him. And when you see all the things that have gone on in this country for 4 years, and you kept your mouth shut or you voted to support what this administration was pushing, I'm not quick to forget that. That's just me. So I'm still blown away that what is supposed to be the people's house, what is supposed to be the most secure buildings in this country, could just be run over like that, you know, and essentially nothing is done. Not only that, you have members of, you know, we're supposed to be protecting it, pulling back barriers, taking selfies with the people who are committing federal crimes. I mean, let's not forget that these are federal crimes. And then when it's over, even after the National Guard comes in, as they are coming out, instead of saying, we're arresting you right here, just let them go. Just let them walk by. You and I would have never been able to do that. You and I never would have walked out of that building alive. And that's just the reality of it. And I think people are I hope people are starting to recognize that now. Now, where we go from here, I don't know. Because all this talk about working together and kumbaya and this is not America. No, this is America. You just chose not to see it. And until we deal with the real history of this country, I don't know how it gets better, you know, because this country was founded on violence. And this country was founded on white supremacy, you know? So anyway, I know I'll probably get in trouble for saying this stuff, but it is what it is. Truth is the truth. And like I say, I only say it from the standpoint, okay, can we start from there? And if we can start from there, then maybe we can start to make progress.
Absolutely. Want to get your last take on who's going to be playing in Tampa Bay in February, Super Bowl? What teams do you have in there? Who do you see? Who do you like? What are your thoughts and predictions on that?
Boy, I think it's playing as well as any team in the league right now. And who thought Green Bay was going to take a step back this year? Because the one thing that we saw last year is that when the Packers run into physical clubs, they tend to lose. I mean, to be quite frank, the 49ers beat up on them twice last year. They basically out physicaled them. And so when I see what Green Bay did to Tennessee, and I see the way that this offense now is clicking and the way the defense playing, a tough out. And that's why I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen there. You're asking me, I'm sorry, who's in the finals? If I had to choose right now, I mean, the obvious ones you would say is Kansas City and Green Bay, the two number one seeds. But weird things always happen in the playoffs. So,
yeah, definitely. Real quick, 30 seconds. Who do the Chargers pick as the next head coach?
I have no idea. Don't know.
Hey, you know what? Your guess is good as mine, sir. You are the great NFL insider. Thank you so much, the one and only Jim Trotter. Appreciate your time and gracious enough to join us here on the NH Experience. Please let everyone know where they can continue to keep up and follow you with all your great work, sir.
I appreciate that. I'm on NFL.com, social media, excuse me, Jim Trotter _NFL. And that's about it, man. I just try to stay under the radar and do my thing. And, you know, hopefully people respect it. And that's all I can ask for.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Your work is definitely respected. You're respected as a person. Definitely inspiring to our community, man. So thank you so much for pushing the culture forward, for doing what you do on your end, and really just opening eyeballs to things that need to be open. You know, eyeballs that need to be open and eardrums that need to be open to listen. So thank you for all of your work and your time.
I appreciate you. It means a lot.
Talk to you soon, sir. I'm sure I'll see you sometime around the press box areas.
Let's hope, man. Let's get this pandemic in control. We can all get back out and do what we love to do, because this is killing me, man. Truly. This will be the first Super Bowl I've missed, I think, since '98, because I'm just not going. I'm not putting myself in harm's way.
Yeah, I said the same thing. I understand.
Yeah.
I'm zoomed out.
No, they were like, you can go to the Super Bowl. I said, for what? To sit in a hotel room and do Zoom calls with the players in a state that doesn't even recognize COVID? I'm like, no. Yeah, I'll do it from my couch, man. So
there you go. House shoes on and on.
Anyway, there you go.
Thanks, Jim. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, bro. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you.